Hey, everybody, welcome back to Odd and Untold, the podcast where we talk about all things strange and spooky. And this is episode 52, but we're actually in our second season now. This is our second year. Just celebrated our anniversary on June 14th. That was the day that we first published our first episode with Seth Breedlove, director from Small Town Monsters. So, and I missed two episodes, so our 50th would have been the one for the year because I missed two episodes due to being really sick in January. I lost my voice, couldn't speak. So, well, I could, but I was hitting a lot of crackling and I sounded like a pubescent teenager. So, didn't really want to torture you guys with that. My normal voice is bad enough. So, I missed two episodes, but we are now in our second year. So, episode 51 came out like the day before our actual anniversary. So, if you're keeping up with this math, kudos to you because I'm still trying to figure it out. But I think that's kind of what happened. So 51 was released on June 13th, which was kind of like right before the 1 year anniversary. But we're in our second year now. So I'm going to be calling this season 2, I guess, but I'm going to keep the episodes just numerically ordered. So this is episode 52. Now that I've bored you with that, just wanted to thank a few people again, because I wouldn't have gotten here this year without all of them, all of you who are listening. So if you're listening, if you're a new listener here, thank you for joining. If you've been listening for a while, thank you for sticking with us. We appreciate it. So YouTube commenters, Fly Spec Cafe, Ooh Sparkly, you guys are awesome. You're always commenting. You're like our most consistent commenters. So thank you. Stephanie McKeon, Christy, Sean Perry, you guys are all great. I'm sure I'm missing people here. My buddy Andy at Spooky Island Radio, fellow podcaster, he's awesome. So thank you guys. Thank you everybody for listening. If I've missed you, I'm sorry. My dad, Gary, my son Jake, you guys are kind of obligated to watch and listen. So, but I'm still thanking you. My co-hosts, Josh Diaz, Scott Perry, my buddy John. These guys have really stepped up to the plate, have really helped me with this show, given me ideas. Some of these show ideas have been theirs, so I have to give them props for that. And they just kind of come on in a pinch. I've had some guests cancel at the last minute, and they always, find time in their busy schedules to come on, help me out, share their stories, share their thoughts, opinions. So, guys, thank you so much. I could not have done this without you. My friend Courtney Maroc, she's been on the show a few times. All my other guests, Seth, Gail, everybody who's been on. I'm sorry if I'm missing you. Heidi's been on twice. So we have some repeat guests. Mike Famelant. So just guys, thank you all so much for coming on, making the show what it is. It's really helped me through a very tough year, which I try not to get into on the show, but it has been a tough year. It's been tough trying to do this week in and week out. It's just a lot of work. It's coming up with topics, recording the episodes, editing the episodes, and trying to do that while working a full-time job, while being a father, while trying to maintain relationships with my friends. So tough year, but here I am. So again, thank you guys all for sticking with me, and on to the show. So this week I wanted to talk about lake monsters because I really haven't touched on that. I think we talked a little bit about a lake monster in the Alaskan Cryptids episode with Heidi. I'll link to that below so you guys can find that episode. But I just recently visited the Finger Lakes region of New York State, like central New York, near Ithaca. So I had done a camping trip over Memorial Day weekend in Ithaca, went to a place called Buttermilk Falls. Beautiful waterfall. It's cut into like shale and it's just been there for like millions of years, and beautiful waterfall, big tourist attraction. Lots of people were there. I'll share some videos in here and probably overlay this with what I'm talking about here. But Buttermilk Falls, we went there. It was great, really beautiful. But we camped there for 3 nights. And on one of the days, we went over to Cornell University, which is there in Ithaca. Beautiful vistas of the valley there. Ithaca is known for its gorges. They said Ithaca is gorgeous. So a lot of gorges there, a lot of waterfalls, and the Finger Lakes are up there. So I got this hat from up there, and that's just a silhouette of the Finger Lakes. but big glacial lakes up there in New York. And on one of the days, I think it was Memorial Day, actually, we went to Cayuga Lake. And it's a huge lake. It's a very huge lake. And I was just kind of taken aback by how big it was. I'm not very familiar with that part of New York. Being from the city, I know the city, I know the Adirondacks. That's essentially where my knowledge ends. So this, being more like towards central New York State was interesting for me. And Bantam Lake, which I've mentioned on the podcast many times, is a glacial lake, and it's a fairly big lake. But going to Cayuga Lake, it's enormous. It's huge, and it makes Bantam Lake look like a small pond. So it was very cool. And this was not a trip that I had taken to do any sort of Bigfoot hunting or paranormal stuff. I didn't record anything for the podcast. This was like purely vacation. This was like, I'm not going to be filming anything for the podcast. I'm not here to look for ghosts or UFOs or Bigfoot or monsters, purely for fun. But of course, I get home and I said, man, that was a really big lake. And I know about Champ, the Lake Champlain monster, which is more on the eastern side of New York State, borders Vermont. And there's a lot of stories about Champ, the lake monster. And again, I'll link below and I'll talk about it a little bit more in the show here. But it just got me wondering. And I was like, hey, is there a Lake Cayuga monster? And there is. So I'm going to talk about that today because I was there sitting on the shores, practically dipping my toes in the waters, and had no idea that there was legends of lake monsters there. I should have known. It's a huge lake. And in my research, I also found that Seneca Lake, which is another one of the Finger Lakes, also has some legends of monsters. So I figured I'd talk about those a little bit today. I don't have any experiences. I didn't see anything while I was there. There were some sailboats out. There were some people, out on kayaks on the lake. And, it wasn't really warm enough for swimming, but people were out there. And it was Memorial Day weekend, so there was a lot of people in the picnic area. Didn't see anything on the lake, but I wasn't looking, as I said. So it wasn't until I got home really and said, let me look into that because that might be interesting. And I think I've heard about the Seneca Lake monster. I didn't really put it together that it was one of the Finger Lakes, but Cayuga Lake I had never heard. And as anybody who followed my old blog, the occult section knows, I wasn't really ever really interested in lake monsters. My thing is like Bigfoot, UFOs, ghosts. Lake monsters have always troubled me because lakes are a little bit more finite. You'd think a body would wash up on the shore at some point. You'd think more people would see it. It's open, woods. It's hard. It's easy to believe that a Bigfoot could hide in the woods. It's harder to believe that an air-breathing creature that tends to come up to the surface a lot would probably be seen more. And then there's also the issue of the food supply. A lot of these lakes where these huge lake monsters are supposed to live in don't have a huge food supply. So what are they eating? It doesn't make sense. And that has always kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I'm still interested in that stuff. Of course, it's an unsolved mystery. It's paranormal or supernatural or cryptozoological, whatever you want to call it. So I'm interested. It's just kind of lower on my list. So I thought I would delve into it a little bit today because, like I said, we haven't really talked about lake monsters on the show, except for when Heidi was on and talked about one up in Alaska. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about the monster of Lake Cayuga called Old Greeny. Okay, so here we are. This is an article from Ithaca.com, and this is about the Lake Cayuga monster. And there's a picture of this big sea serpent. So I'm just going to read a little bit from this article, which again will be linked in the description below. There is something about the Finger Lakes that suggests the possibility of supernatural and mysterious things. Legends and stories abound of hauntings, spirit rapping, I'm guessing knockings, not like rapping, like rap music, utopian communities, I'll talk about that in a little bit, ancient ruins, inexplicable phenomena, extraterrestrial visits, and the occasional glimpse of a Sasquatch. Among the most intriguing stories are the numerous reported sightings in the deepest of the lakes of large aquatic creatures, lake monsters. So, yeah, I mean, New York State has a lot of Bigfoot sightings, Sasquatch. UFO phenomena, especially in like the Hudson River Valley in the 80s. There was a huge flap of like triangular UFOs up there. Inexplicable phenomena. There's like the Seneca guns, which people would hear like these kind of sonic booms like way back in the day before there were, supersonic airplanes. Uh, Utopian communities. Quick story. I'm not going to get too much into this, but we went to lunch at a place in Ithaca and we started reading some of the literature about the place and how they got started, and quickly became aware that there was a community, commune, some people have labeled them a cult, that was running this establishment. They were very nice people, nothing bad to say about them, but it was just funny that we're reading this pamphlet, and the pamphlet is 4 pages long, telling you about how they came into being and how they started their businesses. So yeah, we were like, okay, this is a utopian community. So I guess that's prevalent up there, which we didn't know about before going up there. But I'll keep reading from this article. Each of the Finger Lakes has its own personality, of course, but the big lakes, Seneca and Cayuga, seem to fit within a different, more mysterious category. Their waters are colder, their moods are darker, their waves are bigger. You can travel on boats to and from the sea on these 2 lakes, and their sheer size seems to hint at the possibility of ancient aquatic megafauna. Native American Indians believe Seneca Lake to be a bottomless lake with a monster that lived in its depths. Almost 40 miles long each and 1 to 3 miles in width, the pitch-black depths of both of them, hundreds of feet deeper than sunlight can penetrate, descend to depths below sea level. So as I said, huge, huge lakes. And just, being kind of landlocked in New York and seeing the size of, like, when we got to the lake, it was just mesmerizing. It was just so big. So again, I'm not sure why I didn't think of Lake Monster when I was there. Again, I think I was just trying to not worry about podcasting for a couple of days, which never happens. I'm always worrying about podcasting. So let me continue here. That reports of monsters in Cayuga Lake were numerous, perhaps even routine, in the 1800s can be inferred from a story in the January 5th, 1897 edition of the Ithaca Journal. Incredibly, the piece reported that a recent sighting marked the 69th consecutive year in which there was a confirmed encounter with the monster, nicknamed Old Greeny. The story went on to recount that members of the newspaper staff had been living in daily anticipation of Old Greeny's appearance and had refused reporting assignments that would have taken them near the lake because they were afraid of the monster. The 1897 incident was reported to have been by an Ithaca resident who was driving along the lake's eastern shore, and saw what he knew must be the large, long sea serpent. The story also quoted a tramp, however, who told the reporter that he believed it to be a muskrat. So muskrats are fairly small. But if it's swimming in the water, as they do, it might just look like the head of something much bigger. And again, if people are anticipating seeing a sea serpent, they might attribute it to that. So just wanted to talk about that. So I will continue. More sporadic and isolated reports of the creature continued until 1929, when people began reporting not 1, but 2 creatures seen together along the lake's eastern shore. The creatures were described by witnesses as being approximately 12 to 15 feet in length. It was speculated that they might be members of the Seneca Lake sea serpent family that found their way into the local waters through a subterranean channel, which is believed to exist between the 2 lakes. A little bit of a stretch there, but I like people's ingenuity. Legends of tunnels connecting Cayuga and Seneca Lakes have long circulated, which anyone with a rudimentary grasp of the notion of water seeking its own level knows would be impossible. So yeah, the underwater sort of tunnels doesn't really make sense. I mean, it's possible, but a little bit out there. So let me continue. Occasional other reports of Old Greeny have certainly been made since then, including a 1974 attack, the year I was born, in which a teenage boy apparently had his arm broken by the bite of a large eel-like creature, and the 1979 encounter by a local professional diver of a submerged animal 30 to 35 feet in length. Still, all the reported sightings, save one, have been by 1 or 2 persons. So this one in 1974, where a teenage boy had his arm broken by a large eel-like creature. I'll get into that because a lot of lake monster legends are debunked by skeptics as saying it's a sturgeon, which is a large fish, and we'll get into that in a little bit. I'll talk about that. So here's like a little clipping. Seneca Lake's sea monster killed by steamer's side wheel. It was in the vicinity of 50 feet in length. So just like a little snippet of an article here. So very interesting. But I'm going to continue reading, not much more to this article. The incident with the greatest number of witnesses, and therefore the most credible lake monster encounter, happened on the evening of July 14th, 1899 on Seneca Lake. The side-wheeled steamboat Otitiani, named to evoke the region's Iroquois past, was traveling north toward Geneva from Watkins Glen with several dozen passengers at about 7 p.m. Then, as in 2018, sunset was approximately 8:40, so there was plenty of daylight left, and it had been a sunny and seasonably warm, high of 79, day. Somewhere between Dresden on the west side of the lake and Willard on the east side, pilot Frederick Rose reported that approximately 400 yards ahead of the boat was what appeared to be an overturned boat. Captain Carlton Herendeen examined the thing with his telescope, later describing its appearance as being 25 feet long with a very sharp bow and long, narrow stern. So looks like he's thinking this is a boat. Passengers began to gather. It was a group with some ostensibly credible witnesses, including 2 commissioners of public works, a police commissioner, the manager of the Geneva Telephone Company, and a geology professor. As Captain Herendeen completed his inspection, the pilot signaled the engineer to slow the boat down. The steamboat approached to within 100 yards and lowered a boat to take a closer look. Suddenly, the object turned and began to move away. The captain immediately ordered full speed ahead. As the thing was moving slowly, the steamboat gained on it easily. The object turned again, this time toward the steamboat, and raising its head, looked in the direction of the boat and opened its mouth, displaying 2 rows of sharp white teeth. Captain Herendeen declared that he would ram the creature and take it alive if possible. Otherwise, he would kill it and either take it aboard or tow it to Geneva. This was the United States in 1899, when conservation of flora and fauna was still kind of a fringe idea. Out west, the bison population, perhaps 10 million in 1850, had been reduced to fewer than 1,000. Passenger pigeons, numbering in the billions in 1860, were on the brink of extinction. And so the boat was turned so that the boat would approach the creature from the side at ramming speed. The deck of the steamboat was crowded with passengers who were ordered by the captain to put on life preservers. According to the Geneva Gazette, every eye on deck was fixed on the monster and hardly a person was breathing normally. While the boat was yet some distance from it, the monster again looked at the boat, sank out of sight, and the boat passed over the spot where it had been. So, as the steamboat approached to within 50 yards of the creature, the captain gave the order to turn the boat so that its paddle wheel would strike the creature midway between its head and tail. The boat went ahead full steam and struck the monster with enough impact that many of the passengers were thrown off their feet. The mortally wounded animal lay in the water next to the steamboat. It raised its head, gave what sounded like a gasp, and lay quiet. Its spinal column had been broken and it was dead. Lifeboats were immediately lowered and lines were strung around the body. Passengers and crew tried to secure the carcass. In the end, though, it proved too heavy or unwieldy and dropped into the water, sinking 600 feet to the bottom of Seneca Lake. The ship reached Geneva after dark, and passengers began to tell their stories of the incident. While all agreed that a monster had been seen, differing versions of the length of the monster, from 25 to as much as 90 feet, strained the credibility of the accounts. The Rochester Herald said that Professor George R. Elwood, the geologist on board, and who had been in one of the lifeboats trying to secure the body, gave what was considered the most careful and perhaps most trustworthy account. He thought it was a Cladastes, an extinct marine lizard from the Mosasaur family that lived in what is now the United States until it disappeared from the fossil record at the end of the Cretaceous period about 66 million years ago. Lest skepticism get the better of us, consider that in December 1938, a South African fisherman caught a coelacanth, which is a fish thought to have been extinct since it disappeared from the fossil record at the end of the Cretaceous, about 66 million years ago. So everybody knows the coelacanth. It's the logo of the International Cryptozoology Museum run by Lauren Coleman. Anybody with an interest in cryptozoology knows of this fish because it kind of proves that science isn't always right. Science will say, this thing hasn't been around for 60 million years, and somebody pulls it up out of the water. So let me continue. Professor Elwood went on to describe the creature as about 25 feet long, with a tail which tapered until within about 5 feet of the end, when it broadened out and looked much like a whale. The creature weighed about 1,000 pounds. Its head was perhaps 4 feet long and triangular in shape. Its mouth was very long and was armed with 2 rows of triangular white teeth as sharp as those of a shark, but in shape more like those of a sperm whale. Its body was covered with a horny substance, that's what she said, which was as much like the carapace of a terrapin as anything else of which I know. This horny substance was brown in color and of a greenish tinge. The belly of the creature, which I saw after the rope slipped and the carcass was going down, was cream white. Its eyes were round like those of a fish, and it did not wink. What might it have been? It hardly seemed likely that so many people could have imagined something so vivid if there had been nothing there. Lake sturgeon, as I mentioned earlier, indigenous to both big lakes, can live to be as old as 100 years old, grow to 9 feet long and 300 pounds. Their skin is shark-like, dull gray. Eels are darker but smaller, not getting much longer than 5 feet. Muskellunge can also get to over 5 feet long and weigh 70 pounds. Plus, they have rows of sharp teeth. None are apt to convince a boatload of people that they are in the presence of a 25-foot monster. So the lake sturgeon, these other fish, eels, there are animals who sometimes get very large, larger than the average for their species. And, we've heard about this. We've heard about, black bear, usually when they're standing on 2 feet, don't get much above 5 or 6 feet. But I think there was one that was recorded at like 8 feet at one time, standing up. So you do have animals that do grow a little bit bigger than the average that is known, especially in a large biome like this. You have a huge lake, very deep, very wide, very long. Something very, very well could grow beyond its normal limitations. So I'm going to finish this article here. It was suggested by cynics that the whole thing was a hoax perpetrated by the passengers and crew, which is also exceedingly unlikely. Dozens of people would have had to have kept the secret for the rest of their lives, while human nature suggests that no group larger than 3 people can be trusted to reliably keep a secret for a long weekend. The Geneva Historical Society can document at least 20 separate reported sightings of the Seneca monster, most recently in 2013. Cayuga's Old Greeny has a Facebook page. Clearly, the idea that the big lakes harbor mysteries beyond our knowledge is one that has a stubborn hold on our collective imagination. It's part of the charm of living in the Finger Lakes. So yeah, hoax doesn't seem likely. You have a lot of people on board who saw something. Again, eyewitness testimony can vary. You have some people on the boat who clearly were familiar. You have a geologist, you have, a college professor, a scientist, someone who is perhaps a little bit more specific and accurate in their estimations versus you may have had some passengers on there who were from the city, who were, not familiar with wildlife, not familiar with fish, and not familiar with gauging size. So they see something that's very big, and something that's, 8 or 9 feet long is now 20 feet long or 90 feet long. I mean, 90 feet is very long, but it does seem like there was an animal. It was not a boat. It seems like it was something alive, something biological. It had teeth. It gasped. It died. They were trying to bring it on board, and they failed, and it sank. So it sounds like they did hit something. But what was it? Was it a monster? Was it a fish? Was it an eel? Who knows? So getting back to Old Greeny, and this is from Cryptid Wiki. This is Old Greeny, creature from Cayuga Lake. The river is the longest of western New York's glacial Finger Lakes and the second largest in surface area. The lake is located roughly 350 feet above sea level and has a maximum depth of 435 feet. So pretty deep lake. This one is saying the last sighting was in 2011. This repeats some of the stories. January 5th, 1897, Ithaca Journal article reported that their staff had been living in daily anticipation of Old Greeny's appearance and have actually rejected assignments which would take them near the water's edge for fear of the beast. We mentioned that. This story is interesting. A story within that edition retold the tale of an Ithacan who was driving along the lake's eastern shore with a friend when he saw what he knew must be the large, long sea serpent, although a tramp who had also seen the creature. So again, this is the muskrat story. 1929, the journal reported the existence of 2 mysterious creatures now living in Cayuga Lake, described as about 12 to 15. So this is really just rehashing what I just told you. They probably just went to that article and rewrote it in their own words here. So again, one theory is that it's the misidentification of lake sturgeon. Though not uncommon in these waters, the prehistoric-looking fish has reportedly been caught in Cayuga Lake before. All other theories are that it's eels. So weird stuff. So I'm going to move to Seneca Lake now. Again, I was on Cayuga Lake, but I do think there's this good overlap here. And again, this article, Sea Serpent of Seneca Lake, written by Seneca County historian Walter Gable, October 2009. He talks about the steamboat story again. So I'm going to skip over that because we've already done that. But this last paragraph here I wanted to talk about. There have been several instances in which residents along Seneca Lake have claimed to have seen fish as big as people in the lake, some of these resembling large carp and others that look like porpoises. Don Woodrow, a professor of geoscience at Hobart and William Smith Colleges, attributes these reports to oversized carp, which, when turned over to sun themselves, look bizarre. Perhaps some facts and assumptions have contributed to these stories. One geologic fact is that Seneca Lake and Cayuga Lake are the only two Finger Lakes whose lake bottoms are below sea level. So that's interesting. The Iroquois speculated that the two lakes were joined together by some underground stream or channel hundreds of feet below their lake surfaces. For years, there has reports, so this is a typo here. For years, there have been reports of the sounds of drums or guns on Seneca Lake, mainly, but also on Cayuga Lake. So as I mentioned earlier, the booms that sound like cannons, and this is a phenomenon you hear kind of all over the world. The Barisal guns, the Seneca Lake drums, just these weird booms when you're talking like the 1800s. There are no planes going overhead to create these sonic booms. There's no independent verification that anybody was shooting off cannons or guns. It's just these weird booms. And again, it could be something preternatural, just something the earth is doing, earthquakes, creating these booms or something like that. But I thought that was interesting that the drums or the guns of Seneca Lake and Cayuga Lake. It is left for us to decide whether there are unidentified creatures in Seneca Lake or whether the sighting in 1899 was a practical joke of the perception of some over-refreshed passengers. So, do they have too much to drink? Interesting. So, again, I don't know if these are just stories that propagate. You know, people hear the Loch Ness Monster, and now you're living or visiting a very large lake, and you see something in the lake you don't recognize because it's some sort of fish sunning itself or upside down or just behaving strangely, or maybe it's grown to a very large size and people unfamiliar with it see it and say, oh, look, there's a monster. So hard to say. Sturgeon have been caught in the lakes. The lakes are very big. I'm on this side here, but yeah, Seneca and Cayuga are the two biggest ones there. So I don't know, but I'm going to share this story about the sturgeon and we'll wrap it up there. Okay, so I'm going to read from this article titled A Closer Look, Maybe It's a Lake Sturgeon. And here's a picture of the lake. And again, I'm going to link to all these articles in the description below so you guys can find these on your own because I'm kind of skipping around here and reading pretty quickly. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, Cayuga and Seneca Lakes were known for their sea serpents, though these cryptids have become a bit scarce in recent years. Scientists of the day speculated that they must be relicts, ancient marine reptiles that survived the eons by hunkering down on the depthless, frigid lake bottoms. The theory sounds plausible enough until one realizes that the Finger Lakes were only formed 10,000 years ago at the end of the last ice age. Whatever Old Greeny may be, it's probably not a mosasaur. It's not hard to understand how stress, the power of suggestion, as I mentioned, bad weather, low light, and imperfect vision might have conspired to make people see what was not there. But perhaps we shouldn't dismiss these reports altogether. After all, there's at least one ancient monster that is known to live in Cayuga Lake, the lake sturgeon. And I'm going to say this wrong, Acipensteriforms, which include sturgeons and paddlefish, have not changed their anatomy significantly for 200 million years. They look appropriately primitive and quite martial, with long bodies shaped like missiles and heavy skulls that resemble barbed arrowheads. Although they aren't very closely related, they also share a number of traits with a far more ancient group of fish, the sharks. So here's a picture of somebody holding a sturgeon, and it does look very serpent-like. I mean, its body is huge, and the fins, as you can see here, are not really big in comparison to the size of the body. So smallish fins, this sort of triangular head. It's got like these whiskers. It's got the teeth. So I'm going to keep reading from this article just so everybody can see. Sturgeons, like sharks, have tough gray skin and asymmetrical tails. This asymmetry, very unusual among fish, provides vertical lift, which helps sharks chase down their prey and allows sturgeons, which can be over 7 feet long and weigh more than 300 pounds, to move their gigantic bodies without too much effort. So there you go. They don't need the little fins. They have the big tail. Both species have flexible cartilaginous skeletons instead of bony ones, though for different reasons. Bone is heavy, so sharks remain agile by ditching the weight and attaching their swimming muscles directly to a web of tough collagen fibers encasing their bodies. But sturgeons don't need to be particularly fast, as their prey, invertebrates, shellfish, and the occasional invasive goby, hardly move. They do, however, need to protect their young, even more vigilantly than most fish do. Sturgeon live well over 100 years and take 15 or 20 years to mature. Even then, they may spawn only every half decade. Rather than using bone on the inside for structure and muscle attachments, sturgeon use them on the outside for protection. So these are kind of aggressive fish, it seems like, and just very strange looking. And it's not, people think of going fishing in a lake, you have this sort of cartoonish view of what a fish looks like, and maybe a trout or a bass, and then this thing pops out of the lake and it looks prehistoric. It looks serpentine, because if it does come out of the water, you're not really seeing the little fins. You're just seeing this long sort of neck with a weird head and sharp teeth. It could look very sort of like a dinosaur or a lake monster. So I'm just going to come down to this last paragraph here. It's satisfying to close the book on the Finger Lakes cryptids by simply proclaiming them to be particularly large sturgeons. However, this theory doesn't stand up to scrutiny. For one thing, there's no historical record of sturgeon in monster-heavy Seneca Lake. On the other hand, sturgeon definitely inhabited monster-poor Oneida Lake. The Finger Lakes creatures also seem to have an aggressive streak, but sturgeon are known to be docile, even personable, and their toothless mouths are only threatening if you're a zebra mussel. So I was wrong there. They're not aggressive. They don't have lots of teeth. Finally, since the sturgeon population of the Finger Lakes has made an astounding comeback in recent years, thanks to the heroic efforts of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, you'd think we'd be seeing more sea monsters, not fewer of them. So the mystery remains. Whatever Old Greeny is, it might not be a sturgeon either. So even though they're not necessarily aggressive, again, animals can behave strangely sometimes. The whiskers may have been thought to have been teeth. So this is weird. Again, you have skeptics trying to sort of push this square peg into a round hole and say it's a sturgeon, which I've always thought maybe contributed to a lot of the sightings. A sturgeon or an eel or some other normal animal being in the lake, and then people just attributing it to being a monster. But who knows? It is a weird looking fish. And if one did grow very large, I could see that being a sea monster. So that's my thoughts on Old Greeny, the Cayuga Lake monster. Again, we have Champ up in New York, and that's a whole other episode. I'll see if I can get some people on to talk about that who are far more informed than I am about Champ. Because again, like I said, I'm not big on sea monsters. I've heard the sturgeon theory. I did not know that they were not aggressive and that they didn't have teeth. That I've heard that from skeptics for years and just said, oh, okay. But if that's not what they look like, then it does make you wonder. So what do you guys think? Lake monsters exist? Are they prehistoric animals? Are they dinosaurs? Are they something completely different? Or are they just misidentifications, people just getting caught up in the moment? You go to Lake Champlain, you're expecting to see Champ. You go to Loch Ness, you're expecting to see Nessie. So you see something in the water, that's Nessie. But is it? So what do you guys think? hopefully you enjoyed this episode. I'm going to try to diversify a little bit more and not just do Bigfoot all the time. Even though you guys seem to love the Bigfoot shows, and so do I. Bigfoot's my jam. So if you guys have any comments, questions, you want to, I'll do it on this side. Do it on this side. Jason at oddanduntold.com. Shoot me an email and we can feature your story on the show. Or if you have any questions, shoot me your questions and we will talk about it. And until next time, everybody, rock and roll. And thanks for first great year.